We're going to have our first speaker. A year ago, the governor of Louisiana, John Bell, he created he creates um, a group of people like what is going to help him to develop different areas to combat the climate change in the area. And today we have Lindsay Cooper. We're going to start with her today. She's going to be speaking about Louisiana Climate Initiative and engagement in climate actions. Lindsay is a policy advisor for the Louisiana Governor Office of Coastal Activities, which have a focus in strategy planning, interagency, alliancing, and intergovernmental coordination on state priorities regardless climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. As a project manager for the Louisiana Climate Initiative, Lindsay is managing the government climate initiative task force to ensure the state's ability to meet near and long-term greenhouse emissions reduction target through time and inclusive development of the state climate change of action. She's a graduate from Tulane and she's native from Louisiana. She's passionate about the understanding and connecting with serving the people and environmental in Louisiana. And today she's going to be our first speaker. So please welcome Lindsay Cooper. Thank you for being patient with my accent. And Lindsay is all yours.
Hi everyone, I apologize. I forgot that my video was off and my sound was still muted, but thank you for that introduction, Alejandro, and I hope that everyone is able to view my screen. Is that right, Alejandro? We're good?
Yes, thank you. We're looking at your screen right now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction and to the wonderful planning team across these Louisiana universities that have made this event possible in Louisiana to host a Solve 2030 climate panel, which is such an important issue to all of us. And in my remarks today, as Alejandro mentioned, I work for the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities as a policy advisor and the project manager for the Governor's Climate Initiative. And so that's what I will be talking with you all about today. And I wanted to just start by framing something that's very familiar to all of us. So we're all very aware of the coastal crisis that Louisiana is facing, that we have a huge risk to flood risk and to losing our coastal wetlands. This is really the ultimate context for climate change in Louisiana, which stems from both natural and man-made causes. And it predates our current focus on climate change-driven environmental risk in Louisiana, but it will also be exacerbated by that. So as you can see on this map in red, Louisiana has and will continue to lose our coastal wetlands at a rapid rate. So efforts to restore our coast began in the late 1980s, but really kicked into gear after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, even more so in 2010 after we received funding from the BP oil spill settlements. And Congress created the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority in Louisiana to create this master plan of how can we address this coastal crisis Louisiana has. But as this map shows, even with the efforts put forth by this Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, we'll still be losing land in Louisiana. And I think this is great framing for our conversation today because it shows that we won't just be able to adapt our way out of the climate crisis. We need to both adapt and mitigate. And this is a big initiative that the governor has undertaken in his second term since he took office again last year. Focusing on this adaptation and mitigation connectivity and the interconnected nature that we need to have between these types of initiatives. So I'll talk briefly on adaptation around this adaptive governance initiative that the governor launched last year, but spend most of our time today talking about the Climate Initiatives Task Force, which was also launched by the governor in last year. And these were both two executive orders that took form in August of 2020. And so we've done a lot of work to get them off the ground since that time. Just to touch on the resilience executive order, focusing on that adaptation lens, we understand that that can't just be outsourced to rebuilding wetlands and reducing flood risk, but needs to be incorporated into how we govern the state. So in this executive order, the governor laid forth a chief resilience officer, someone whose job it is to ensure that resilience is incorporated into the work of state agencies. So right now in the process, they're starting to assess vulnerabilities of agencies, develop some options of how to address those vulnerabilities, and then institutionalize resilience in how we plan our state agencies. But again, this is only half of the puzzle. The other piece comes with addressing mitigation of our greenhouse gas emissions. And the governor laid forth, as I mentioned, an executive order in August that established these greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. It was the first time that we really began to address our greenhouse gas emissions in Louisiana that are driving global temperatures up and changing our climate. And so these goals might look familiar to some of you. Many, I think about 25 other states and other countries have also adopted similar goals, but there's a near-term goal of a 26 to 28% reduction by 2025, an interim target of 40 to 50% reduction by 2030, and then the goal of net carbon neutrality by 2050. And the governor established the Climate Initiatives Task Force so that it could help the state meet these short and long-term emission reduction goals through a timely development of a state climate action strategy. And so our goal for that is February of 2022, so not too far away from here. And as I note on the left side of this screen, the governor laid forth a challenging vision in this effort that Louisiana can and will reduce our emissions, but we have to reckon with these increasing vulnerabilities our state has and the necessity to protect our people and our natural and cultural heritage, but also understanding and being considerate of the economy that we have and that anchors us to the present day. So this leads well into thinking through what our objectives are in this effort. So of course, it's primarily important to us that we're reducing our emissions, but it also matters in how we choose to reduce those emissions. There's a lot that needs to happen between now and that goal of net neutrality in 2050. So our task force and many of our groups spent much of the first few months of this effort determining what else is important to us in meeting our goals. So alongside of reducing emissions, it's also important to us to improve quality of life for residents and communities, to create a more equitable society, to manage for short and long-term success, to strengthen our economy and workforce, to conserve our natural resources and protect the environment, and also to adapt to a changing climate. So these are also very important to us, and realizing that to create a climate strategy that helps meet those emission reduction goals, but also furthers those expressed objectives, it was hard for us to just rely on a 23-member task force that the governor had set forth, bringing together different leaders of state agencies and academic institutions. One of our task force members is Dr. Chambers, who will present next right after me. Also leaders in industry and environmental justice organizations, trying to find a way to bring everyone to the table for these conversations. But to enhance the work of the task force, we have also created 10 subgroups underneath the task force. So in blue at the bottom of this slide, I'd note the 6 different emission sector committees that are just based around our different emission sectors in Louisiana. Understanding that to meet our emission reduction goals, everyone has to be at the table. Everyone has to think of solutions to help reduce our emissions. So we've created those 6 different groups alongside 4 advisory groups that are noted in green right above those sector committees. And these advisory groups are to provide input to the sector committees as well as the task force across all of the work that they're doing, so that we do create equitable principles throughout this effort, that we have financially feasible solutions, that there is legal integrity in what we put forth, and that there is also scientific integrity, and we're using the most up-to-date science in our work as well. So all of these groups are helping to enhance the work of the task force. And actually in total, we have 146 members on all of these different groups who make this effort possible. We couldn't do it without them. Bringing all these experts to the table is really important to us. And as I mentioned, across industry and state agencies, academic institutions, nonprofits, environmental justice organizations, a way to bring everyone to the table. And After this Friday, our groups will have met 29 times. We have 6 meetings over the next couple of days. So after Friday, our groups will have met 29 times since November of 2020. So making some really incredible progress in pushing us forward towards creating a climate plan to meet these goals. But I would say with a lot of different groups involved, it's important for us to have a very systematic and rigid process of how we're able to move through this quick timeline with all of our groups. And so we're utilizing something called structured decision making, which is very inherent what it means in its name, but it's a way to provide a systematic way to question, to evaluate, to understand and communicate what are the impacts of some different approaches to reducing emissions, and how can we help the task force make decisions? So it's this intersection of science and policy and decision making, which is a really great approach to use in addressing our climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And with that, I would just say, to further complicate matters, there's no single solution. We all know that it's going to be a combination of a lot of different work over time. And so we need a suite of different solutions to meet these goals. So with that, we have embarked upon, and we're actually in the midst of an action development process right now, seeking to develop emission reduction actions in each of our sectors that we can consider in developing our climate strategy. So this is something we're focusing those sector committees on in their work right now. But this is also an open call to public ideas. And I would implore all of you to actively participate in this as well. And we lay forth an action proposal template, a way to submit ideas you have on reducing emissions around specific policies or programs or projects to be directly implemented. And this template lays out the overview of the action you'd like to propose, some impacts and feasibility and implementation pathways. And we understand it's a very comprehensive template, but just wanted to lay forth some of the considerations that we think are important in considering emission reduction actions. So with that, I would say that our action templates are available on our website that I will circulate, or I will have circulated to you all after this call, so that we can hear your input as well through either a Google form that we have or a downloadable and fillable PDF that we have as well. And these templates are available in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. And our deadline of receiving these of our public call for proposals is April 30th. So we still have a few more weeks. And we'd really love to hear from all of you on your ideas. And that segues very well into our conversation today on climate solutions that we're developing by 2030. And so the work of our action development process ties in really well. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all on this. And so I would note that in the midst of our action development process, we're trying to stay, as the governor's office, we're trying to stay out of the middle of that process and leave that to our groups to determine. But I would say that there is one easy win that cuts across our climate mitigation and adaptation goals. So keeping in mind everything that we just talked about, there is the recognition that decarbonization of fossil fuels and other emissions is essential in our emission reduction puzzle, but nature also has a major role to play in sequestering carbon. So that's why I think this solution that I share with you all of maximizing natural sequestration is a really great place for Louisiana to get engaged. So when I say natural sequestration, I just mean the ability of our natural environment to capture, secure, and store carbon dioxide. And today I'll focus on, for the next few minutes, on that forest and wetland component of natural sequestration. Because according to the World Resources Institute, where I had gotten both of these graphics, forests currently absorb a lot of carbon dioxide, actually the equivalent of 30% of our global greenhouse gas emissions are sequestered in our forests. And the other 70% is released into the atmosphere and into the oceans that just exacerbates climate change. And if we really focused on regrowing our natural forests, we could add an additional 23% of the natural sequestration potential with our forests if we focused on that natural regrowth, as I note on the right side. And that's over 50% of our emissions that could be sequestered. Again, this isn't to negate the need for decarbonization and other emission reduction tools, but this is just another tool in the toolbox that we can use. And if you think that's great, that forests have such a great sequestration potential, Louisiana has a lot of wetlands, and wetlands are also great natural sequesters as well. So wetlands are typically waterlogged and dark ecosystems. They're very productive. So they have a high stable carbon content. And plants grow a lot in wetlands, so they capture an even larger amount of carbon dioxide. So this graphic on the right that I include here from a study of one of our local scientists, it shows the different sequestration potential of different forests and seagrasses and salt marshes. But you can see at that last bar on the graphic of coastal Louisiana marshes that Louisiana has a lot of sequestration potential through our natural wetlands. And it's estimated globally that wetlands sequester about 225 billion metric tons of carbon annually. And if we look back to the forests that had a lot of sequestration potential, they only sequester about 59 billion, which is still a lot of carbon, but wetlands have such a high potential. So you might be wondering, why would we focus on forest if we just could focus on wetlands, since they're much more productive ecosystems? But if we look at the reality of just our geography and our development, forests cover about 36% of the US landscape, and wetlands only cover 4% of the US landscape. So it's important that we utilize both environments as sequesters, since wetlands do make up such a small part of the United States landscape. But I would say, and noted in these black circles that I just put on the screen, Louisiana has great potential for both forest and wetland sequestration. And so the good news is that Louisiana has a lot of opportunity for climate solutions and engagement in utilizing the ecosystems that we have around us for natural sequestration. And the last thing I'll say on this before getting into my action ideas is that there are multiple benefits here. So it's not just carbon sequestration, although that's a huge benefit of regrowing forests and preserving our wetlands. It also helps reduce our flood risk. It's a buffer for storms and hurricanes coming up from the Gulf of Mexico. It assists in nutrient uptake as well, community resilience, ecosystem restoration benefits for rebuilding those natural habitats, and then social and recreational benefits as well, just a place for us to be able to fish and have the time with our natural environment as well. So there are a lot of benefits stored up in this one proposal. So getting more into actions, thinking about how do we really maximize forest and wetland sequestration. I note on the slide a lot of different ideas where it would be wonderful to have you all engaged. And I know that some might speak to different audiences, so I figured it was better to offer a few ideas that could go across the board. So one thing that came to my mind around research and monitoring opportunities is that professors and students can continue doing research in wetlands, that we need to not just focus on building more wetlands, but preserving what we do have. And actually, wetlands that are unhealthy, that are in poor health, actually emit carbon into the atmosphere. So we need to keep our wetlands healthy. So we need to continue monitoring and studying what helps our wetlands to remain productive, especially in light of sea level rise. So we can monitor and evaluate how sea level is rising in different ecosystems. What is the soil health like? What is the wetland and ecosystem health like? So that's one idea I had there. Another idea I had is just the realization that communities in Louisiana are closely tied to our ecosystem. So if we're going to preserve and rebuild our environments, we need to work with communities around this. This is a great place for universities and university students, especially those far from home, can really get engaged with the local environment that is around them. And so engaging with those coastal communities and understanding their needs and adapting to climate change, as well as in mitigating some of that risk. As I mentioned, with natural forest regrowth could be such a great potential for sequestering more carbon. We need to plant more trees then, and we have a lot of places where we can do that. Actually, as Alejandro mentioned, I went to Tulane myself and participated in many tree plantings, which were just some of the funnest weekends of being at Tulane. And so we need to focus on regrowing these natural resources. And that ties well into the recreational opportunities as well, providing opportunities for students and for teachers even to be able to experience the environment around them. And when that's not possible, having challenging classroom conversations, because we need to have an appreciation for the environment that's before us before we can understand the need for preservation. So having those conversations and those outdoor experiences as well. And the last thing I'll say is just a last plug in our action development process. We'd love to hear from you all in our open call through the end of this month. And I will work with the planning team to make sure that we get those resources out to you all. So with that, I will take any questions, or maybe I'll stop sharing my screen now so we can move to the next presenter.
Thank you, Lindsay.